You're just a burden, Harold. A stubborn old man clinging to the past. Amanda's words cut through the Sunday dinner conversation like a blade through silk. The roast beef grew cold on my plate as every eye at the table turned toward me. My son Robert shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. Amanda's smile was razor-sharp, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against her wine glass. She thought she had me cornered, this woman who married my boy and decided I didn't belong in my own family anymore. What she didn't know was that this stubborn old man had spent 40 years building something she couldn't even imagine. Soon enough, she'd find out exactly what kind of burden she'd been dismissing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The silence stretched across the dining room like a taut wire ready to snap. I sat there, Harold Thompson, 72 years old, watching my daughter-in-law's triumphant expression as she waited for me to crumble under her verbal assault. The chandelier above cast dancing shadows across the mahogany table that Margaret and I had bought 30 years ago, back when this house was filled with laughter instead of tension. Amanda leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms with the satisfaction of someone who believes she just delivered a knockout punch. Her auburn hair felt perfectly around her shoulders, every strand in place, just like her calculated cruelty. She'd been building to this moment for months, dropping little comments about my presence in the house, suggesting I'd be better off in a retirement community, making faces when I shared stories about Margaret or the old days. Robert finally set down his fork, the clatter unnaturally loud in the oppressive quiet. "Amanda, that's enough," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I could see the conflict in his eyes, torn between loyalty to his wife and respect for his father. The boy I'd raised, the man I'd worked 2 jobs to put through college, couldn't even look me in the eye as his wife systematically dismantled my place in this family. "Is it, though?" Amanda's voice rose with false sweetness, the kind that dripped poison while maintaining plausible deniability. "Robert, we've talked about this. Your father is holding us back. This house, these old traditions, all these reminders of the past. We need to think about our future, about the family we want to build." Her hand moved to rest on her still flat stomach, a gesture both protective and manipulative. She'd announced her pregnancy just 2 weeks ago, and since then every conversation had become about what was best for the baby. I gripped my water glass, feeling the cool condensation against my weathered palm. The ice cubes clinked softly as my hand trembled, not from age or weakness, but from the effort of containing 40 years of business instincts that screamed at me to fight back. Amanda saw only what she wanted to see, an elderly widower shuffling around in worn slippers and flannel shirts, someone whose time had passed, whose opinions no longer mattered. She had no idea that those same hands had signed contracts worth millions, that this mind she dismissed as outdated had built a logistics empire from nothing but determination and Margaret's unwavering faith. The shipping company I'd founded in 1982 with a single truck and a prayer had grown into Thompson Transport Solutions, a regional powerhouse that moved goods across 5 states. I'd sold it 3 years ago when Margaret's health declined, wanting to spend her final months focused on family instead of freight schedules and profit margins. The dining room felt smaller now, the walls closing in as Amanda continued her assault. "And honestly, Harold, when was the last time you contributed anything meaningful to this household? You shuffle around in your bathrobe, you leave the television too loud, and you're always talking about Margaret as if she's still here." Her voice cracked like a whip on my wife's name, turning my beloved's memory into a weapon against me. That last comment hit deeper than anything else she'd said. Margaret had been gone for 8 months now. And yes, I talked about her. I shared memories of our travels, our adventures, the wisdom she'd accumulated over our 47 years together. To Amanda, these were the ramblings of a lonely old man. To me, they were the only way to keep Margaret's spirit alive in a house that felt empty without her laughter echoing through the hallways. Robert's phone buzzed against the table, and he glanced at it with obvious relief, grateful for any distraction from the uncomfortable scene unfolding in front of him. "I should take this," he mumbled, already pushing back his chair. "It's work." He disappeared into the kitchen, leaving me alone with Amanda and her mounting hostility. The moment Robert's footsteps faded, Amanda's mask slipped completely. The sweet, concerned daughter-in-law vanished, replaced by someone whose eyes held genuine contempt. "Listen, old man," she hissed, leaning forward across the table. "I'm pregnant, and I'm not raising my child in a house with someone who can't even remember to flush the toilet half the time. Robert's too nice to say it, but I'm not. You need to go." Her words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire, acrid and suffocating. I set my water glass down with deliberate care, my movements slow and measured. Amanda mistook my composure for defeat, her smile returning as she settled back in her chair like a cat who'd just cornered a mouse. What she didn't understand was that I'd faced down union bosses, negotiated with corporate executives who could buy and sell her designer wardrobe 100 times over, and built a business empire while she was still learning to spell her own name. This wasn't defeat she was seeing. This was strategy. This was patience. This was the quiet calculation of a man who'd learned long ago that the loudest voice in the room was rarely the most powerful. I thought about Margaret, about the promise I'd made to her hospital bed 8 months ago. "Take care of Robert," she'd whispered, her voice barely audible above the machines keeping her alive. "Don't let anyone tear this family apart." At the time, I'd thought she was worried about me isolating myself in grief. Now I realized she'd seen something in Amanda that I'd been too trusting to recognize. The front door opened and closed as Robert returned from taking his call, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood floor. When he appeared in the doorway, I saw him glance between Amanda's satisfied expression and my carefully neutral face, trying to read the temperature of the room he'd abandoned. "Everything okay in here?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Amanda reached across the table and patted my hand with mock sympathy, her touch as cold as her smile. "Your father and I were just having a heart-to-heart about the future, weren't we, Harold?" Her emphasis on my name made it sound like an accusation, as if my very existence was an inconvenience she was forced to tolerate. I nodded slowly, my mind already 3 steps ahead of this moment. "Indeed we were, Amanda. Indeed we were." I stood from the table, my movements deliberate despite the arthritis that made my joints protest. "If you'll excuse me, I think I'll retire to my study for the evening. All this talk about the future has given me quite a bit to think about." As I walked toward the hallway, I heard Amanda whisper something to Robert, her voice too low for me to catch the words, but her tone unmistakably victorious. She thought she'd won, thought she'd finally broken the stubborn old man who refused to disappear quietly into the background of her perfect life. What Amanda didn't know was that my study contained more than just photo albums and old books. Hidden behind the false back of my desk drawer was a folder that would change everything she thought she knew about the burden she'd just tried to discard. Inside that folder were bank statements, investment portfolios, and legal documents that told the real story of Harold Thompson's legacy. Tomorrow, I would make some phone calls. Tomorrow, I would remind certain people that retirement didn't mean disappearance, and that underestimating a Thompson had never been a wise business decision. But tonight, I would sit in Margaret's favorite armchair, surrounded by the memories Amanda wanted to erase, and planned exactly how to show my daughter-in-law what kind of man she'd foolishly chosen to make her enemy. The study door clicked shut behind me, sealing away Amanda's toxic words and Robert's uncomfortable silence. I stood in the familiar darkness for a moment, breathing in the scent of old leather and Margaret's fading perfume that still lingered in the fabric of her reading chair. My fingers found the light switch, and the warm glow of the banker's lamp illuminated the sanctuary where I'd spent countless evenings planning routes, negotiating contracts, and building the empire that Amanda dismissed as ancient history. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The walls were lined with books Margaret had chosen, their spines creating a rainbow of knowledge that stretched from floor to ceiling. Philosophy texts sat beside romance novels, business journals next to poetry collections. She'd always said a man's library revealed his soul, and mine apparently had quite a few different personalities living inside it. I walked to her chair, the burgundy leather worn smooth from years of her gentle presence, and ran my hand along the armrest where she used to balance her evening tea. Pictures covered every available surface, chronicling a life lived fully despite Amanda's insistence that I was stuck in the past. There was Margaret and me on our honeymoon in Niagara Falls, both of us young and convinced we could conquer the world together. Another showed us at Robert's graduation from engineering school, my chest swelling with pride as he accepted his degree. A third captured Margaret cutting the ribbon at the grand opening of our third distribution center, her smile radiant as local reporters snapped photos of the woman who turned her husband's crazy dream into reality. Amanda saw these photographs as shrines to irrelevance, but they were actually evidence of something far more dangerous to her plans. They were proof that Harold Thompson had never been content to accept other people's limitations. When everyone told me that a high school dropout couldn't build a shipping empire, Margaret and I had proved them wrong. When competitors tried to freeze us out of lucrative contracts, we'd found different routes to success. When the big companies attempted to crush our small operation, we'd outmaneuvered them with speed and personal service they couldn't match. I settled into Margaret's chair, feeling the cushions conform to my body as if welcoming me home. The desk across the room held my computer, but tonight I needed something more tangible than digital records. I needed to touch the foundation of everything Amanda was trying to demolish. I pulled open the bottom drawer, my fingers finding the hidden latch that Margaret had helped me install 20 years ago when industrial espionage was a real concern in our growing business. The false back panel slid away, revealing the documents I'd hoped never to need again. Bank statements, showing balances that would make Amanda's designer shopping sprees look like pocket change. Investment portfolios managed by the same financial advisors who handled old Cleveland money, the kind of established wealth that didn't need to announce itself with flashy cars or designer labels. Legal documents establishing trust funds and charitable foundations that would continue Margaret's philanthropic work long after I was gone. But the most important paper was the one I pulled out first, a handwritten letter from Margaret, penned during her final weeks when she knew the cancer was winning but wanted to ensure I understood her last wishes. Her careful script, made shaky by medication but still determined, covered 3 pages with observations I'd been too grief-stricken to fully process at the time. "My dearest Harold," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means you've discovered what I suspected about Amanda long before she showed her true colors. I've watched her during family dinners, seen how she calculates every word, every gesture. She doesn't love Robert for who he is. She loves the stability he represents, the respectability, the potential inheritance she assumes comes with marrying into an established family." Margaret's words continued, each sentence a knife thrust of clarity. "She's been asking Robert about your business, about property values, about what will happen to the house when you're gone. She thinks she's being subtle, but I've spent 47 years reading people's intentions, and hers are as clear as glass. Robert is too trusting, too much like his father in that regard. He sees the best in people, even when they're showing him their worst." The letter went on to detail specific conversations Margaret had overheard, moments when Amanda thought she wasn't listening, comments about how much the house could sell for, suggestions that I was too old to manage my own finances, hints that Robert should take a more active role in my affairs. Margaret had documented it all with the methodical precision of someone who understood that love sometimes required uncomfortable truths. "I'm not telling you this to poison your relationship with her," Margaret continued. "I'm telling you because I know that when I'm gone, she'll see you as an obstacle to her plans. She'll try to convince Robert that you're a burden, that your presence is holding them back from their future. When that happens, and it will happen, I need you to remember who you are. Not the grieving widower she sees, but the man who built something lasting with his bare hands and his brilliant mind. I set the letter aside, my throat tight with emotions I'd been suppressing for months. Margaret had always been my compass, pointing me toward true north when the world seemed determined to spin me in circles. Even from beyond the grave, she was still guiding me through the storm Amanda had created in our family. The next document in the stack was a detailed financial analysis I'd commissioned 6 months ago, part of my estate planning process. The numbers were staggering, even to me. Thompson Transport Solutions had sold for $12 million, but that was just the beginning of the story. Decades of careful investment, real estate acquisitions, and business partnerships had multiplied that initial success into something approaching dynastic wealth. The house Amanda wanted me to vacate was worth just over $2 million, but it sat on 12 acres of prime development land that tripled its actual value. The art collection Margaret had assembled over the years, pieces Amanda walked past without a second glance, included 3 paintings by regional artists whose work now hung in the Cleveland Museum of Art. Even my vintage truck collection, which Amanda dismissed as junk cluttering the garage, represented a 6-figure investment in perfectly restored American automotive history. But the real revelation was in the final pages of the financial report. Robert had no idea about the trust fund I'd established in his name, seeded with enough money to ensure his children's children would never want for anything. Amanda's pregnancy might be her trump card in manipulating my son, but she had no concept of the resources that child would inherit as a Thompson. I leaned back in Margaret's chair, the leather creaking softly as I processed the full scope of what Amanda was trying to steal. She wasn't just attempting to push an old man out of his home, she was positioning herself to control an inheritance that could fund her most extravagant dreams for generations. The burden she wanted to discard was actually the source of everything she truly desired. My phone buzzed on the desk, a text message from Dorothy Williams, Margaret's closest friend and my own confidant since the funeral. Dorothy had been suspicious of Amanda from the beginning, her social worker instincts finely tuned to manipulation and false sincerity. The message was brief but loaded with meaning. "Coffee tomorrow? I have information you need to hear about your daughter-in-law's afternoon activities." I typed back a quick agreement, knowing that Dorothy's network of retired professionals and community volunteers saw everything that happened in Millbrook. If Amanda was scheming beyond the walls of this house, Dorothy would know about it. The old ladies who met for bridge every Tuesday were more effective than any private investigator, their collective knowledge covering every secret in town. Standing from the chair, I walked to the window that overlooked the back garden Margaret had tended with such care. Even in the dim moonlight, I could see the raised beds where she'd grown herbs for cooking and flowers for cutting. Amanda had already mentioned her plans to hire a landscaper to modernize the space, replacing Margaret's cottage garden with something more contemporary. The thought of strangers ripping out Margaret's roses, of machinery churning up the soil where she'd knelt every morning with her coffee and her quiet prayers, sparked something fierce in my chest. This wasn't just about respect or family dynamics anymore. This was about preserving the last tangible pieces of a woman who'd made everything I'd accomplished possible. I returned to the desk and opened my laptop, the screen casting a blue glow across the scattered documents. My email inbox contained the usual retirement correspondence, but tonight I needed to reach deeper into my professional past. I opened my contacts list and scrolled through names I hadn't considered in years, men and women who'd built their own empires and understood the language of strategic thinking. The first email went to Marcus Chen, my former attorney who'd handled the sale of Thompson Transport Solutions. Marcus had retired to a consulting role, but his reputation for protecting family wealth made him invaluable for what I was planning. The second message went to Patricia Hawthorne, a private investigator who specialized in financial fraud and had helped me uncover embezzlement in my company years ago. If Amanda had secrets worth discovering, Patricia would find them. By the time I finished my correspondence, it was nearly midnight. The house had grown quiet, the sounds of Amanda and Robert's conversation finally fading from the living room below. I gathered the documents from the desk, carefully returning them to their hidden compartment. Tomorrow would bring revelations, strategies, and the beginning of Amanda's education about the kind of man she'd chosen to underestimate. But tonight belonged to Margaret's memory and the promise I'd made to protect our family's legacy. I turned off the lamp and sat in the darkness for a few more minutes, feeling her presence in the familiar shadows. Amanda thought she was dealing with a broken old man clinging to the past. Tomorrow, she'd begin to understand that she was actually facing a force that had shaped the future for 40 years and wasn't finished yet. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window as I prepared my usual breakfast of black coffee and wheat toast, the same routine I'd maintained since Margaret passed. The house felt different today, charged with possibility rather than weighed down by grief. Amanda's footsteps echoed overhead as she moved around the master bedroom, preparing for another day of playing the perfect expectant mother while plotting my exile. Dorothy Williams arrived at exactly 9 o'clock, her silver Honda Civic pulling into the driveway with the precision of someone who'd spent 40 years managing social services cases. At 74, Dorothy remained sharp as a blade, her blue eyes missing nothing as she surveyed situations with the analytical mind that had made her legendary among Millbrook's social workers. She carried a manila folder under her arm, thick enough to suggest she'd been busy since our text exchange. We settled in the living room where Margaret and I had entertained countless guests over the decades.
Dorothy declined my offer of coffee, her expression serious as she opened the folder and spread its contents across the coffee table. Photographs, printed emails, bank statements, and handwritten notes created a mosaic of information that made my stomach tighten with recognition. "Harold, I need you to prepare yourself for what I'm about to show you," Dorothy said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd delivered difficult news to families for decades. "Amanda isn't just trying to push you out of this house. She's been systematically gathering information about your finances, your property, and your legal vulnerabilities for months." The first photograph showed Amanda entering the offices of Millbrook Real Estate, the folder in her hand thick with documents I didn't recognize. The timestamp indicated she'd made this visit 3 weeks ago, during the hours when Robert was at work and I was attending my weekly physical therapy appointment. Dorothy's network had captured her emerging 2 hours later, her expression satisfied in a way that made my jaw clench. "She met with Janet Morrison, the broker who handles the most expensive properties in town," Dorothy continued, sliding another document toward me. "According to my source inside the office, Amanda presented herself as your legal representative, claiming you'd asked her to get a current market evaluation for estate planning purposes." The property assessment made my breath catch. Amanda had somehow obtained detailed information about the house's square footage, the acreage, the recent improvements Margaret and I had made to the kitchen and bathrooms. More disturbing was the notation about development potential, suggesting someone had researched the possibility of subdividing the land for residential construction. "How did she get access to this information?" I asked, though part of me already suspected the answer. Dorothy's expression darkened. "Robert signed a power of attorney document 6 weeks ago. Amanda convinced him it was standard preparation for the baby's arrival, ensuring she could handle family business if something happened to him at work. She's been using that document to access records that should have required your direct authorization. The next set of papers documented Amanda's visits to 3 different elder care facilities, each consultation scheduled during my therapy appointments or grocery runs. She'd toured memory care units, inquired about costs, and even requested information about involuntary commitment procedures for family members deemed unsafe to live independently. She told the administrators at Sunset Manor that you'd been experiencing confusion and memory issues, Dorothy said, her voice tight with controlled anger. She claimed Robert was worried about your ability to manage your own affairs, that the family was concerned about your driving and your financial decisions. The fabrication was so breathtakingly audacious that I almost admired her strategic thinking. Almost. Amanda had created a narrative where my resistance to her demands would be reframed as evidence of cognitive decline. Any attempt to assert my independence could be dismissed as the stubbornness of an elderly man losing his mental faculties. There's more, Harold. Dorothy pulled out a stack of printed emails, the headers showing correspondence between Amanda and someone named Derek Castellanos. She's been communicating with a lawyer in Cleveland who specializes in elder law and estate disputes. Based on these messages, she's exploring legal options for having you declared incompetent to manage your own affairs. I scanned the email exchanges, each message a nail in the coffin Amanda was building around my autonomy. She'd researched guardianship laws, inquired about the process for contesting wills, and asked detailed questions about how to protect family assets from an elderly person's poor judgment. The clinical language couldn't disguise the predatory nature of her intentions. She's also been meeting with a financial advisor, Dorothy continued, producing bank statements that made my blood pressure spike.
Someone who's been helping her understand the full scope of what she believes she'll inherit. The problem is, her information is dangerously incomplete. The financial projections Amanda had commissioned assumed that my estate consisted primarily of the house, a modest savings account, and Robert's childhood trust fund. She had no knowledge of the investment portfolios, the business sale proceeds, or the charitable foundations that represented the true extent of my wealth. Her planning was based on inheriting perhaps $2 million, when the actual figure was closer to $20 million. She's not just greedy, Harold. She's operating from a position of ignorance that could destroy everything you and Margaret built, Dorothy said, gathering the papers into neat stacks. If she succeeds in having you declared incompetent, if she gains control of your affairs through manipulation or legal maneuvering, she could make decisions that would devastate your real legacy. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at Margaret's garden where spring flowers were beginning to emerge from the soil she'd tended with such care. The irony was staggering. Amanda thought she was positioning herself to inherit a comfortable but modest estate. In reality, she was plotting to steal a fortune that could fund her most extravagant dreams for multiple lifetimes. "What's her timeline?" I asked, turning back to Dorothy. "Based on the consultation schedules and legal correspondence, I'd estimate she plans to move within the next month," Dorothy replied. "The pregnancy gives her a deadline. She wants you out of the house before the baby arrives, wants legal control established before Robert has time to think too carefully about the implications." The strategic implications crystallized in my mind like a chess problem I'd been studying for weeks. Amanda's strength was her ability to manipulate Robert's emotions, to use his love for her and excitement about fatherhood as weapons against his loyalty to me. But her weakness was the scope of her ignorance about what she was actually trying to steal. "Dorothy, I need you to make some phone calls for me," I said, moving to the desk where I kept my personal address book. "There are people who need to know that Harold Thompson is very much in control of his faculties and very interested in protecting his family's interests." I opened the book to a page I hadn't referenced in months, running my finger down a list of names that represented 4 decades of professional relationships. Marcus Chen's number was first, followed by Patricia Hawthorne's, then a dozen other contacts who specialized in protecting assets from exactly the kind of threat Amanda represented. The first call goes to my attorney. I want my will updated and my financial protection strengthened before Amanda can file any legal challenges, I said, writing names and numbers on a notepad. The second call goes to my accountant. I want a complete financial audit, every asset documented and protected. Dorothy nodded, her expression shifting from concern to something approaching satisfaction. What about Robert? He's caught in the middle of this, Harold. Amanda's manipulation could cost him more than just his relationship with you. The question hit the heart of my dilemma. Exposing Amanda meant exposing the extent of her deception to Robert, forcing him to confront the possibility that the woman carrying his child had been systematically betraying his family for months. But protecting him from that truth meant allowing Amanda's scheme to continue, potentially succeeding. I'll handle Robert, I said, though I wasn't certain how. First, I need to build an unshakable foundation. Amanda thinks she's dealing with a confused old man who doesn't understand modern legal and financial systems. Let's show her exactly how wrong she is. Dorothy stood, gathering her folder with the efficiency of someone who'd spent a lifetime organizing complex information for strategic purposes. I'll make those calls this afternoon, but Harold, you need to be prepared for Amanda to escalate when she realizes her timeline is threatened.
Desperate people do desperate things. After Dorothy left, I sat in the living room, surrounded by the evidence of Amanda's betrayal, feeling a familiar stirring in my chest. It was the same sensation I'd experienced 40 years ago when a major competitor tried to undercut my shipping routes, the same focused energy that had driven me to outmaneuver larger companies with superior resources. Amanda had chosen the wrong family to underestimate and the wrong man to manipulate. I picked up my phone and dialed Marcus Chen's number, my fingers steady as I prepared to set forces in motion that would reshape Amanda's understanding of power, wealth, and the consequences of threatening a Thompson's legacy. The conversation would be brief, professional, and absolutely devastating to everything Amanda thought she knew about her future. The battle lines were drawn, and for the first time since Margaret's death, I felt completely, vibrantly alive. Marcus Chen's voice carried the same measured confidence that had made him legendary in Cleveland's legal circles, even in retirement. "Harold, my friend, it's been too long. Dorothy Williams filled me in on your situation, and I have to say your daughter-in-law has stepped into dangerous territory." The phone connection was crystal clear, but I could hear the rustle of papers in the background as Marcus reviewed the documents Dorothy had rushed to his office that morning. Within 3 hours of my call, Marcus had assembled a legal response that would have impressed me even during my most aggressive business negotiations. "First, we're filing an immediate revocation of any power of attorney documents signed under false pretenses," he explained, his tone shifting into the strategic mode that had protected my interests for 20 years. "Second, we're establishing an irrevocable trust that removes your assets from any potential guardianship proceedings. Amanda can't steal what she can't legally touch." The legal machinery grinding into motion felt like the satisfying click of tumblers falling into place in a complex lock. Patricia Hawthorne had already begun her investigation into Amanda's background. Her preliminary findings suggested layers of deception that went far beyond what Dorothy had uncovered. Amanda's previous relationships, her employment history, even her family background contained discrepancies that painted a picture of someone skilled at reinventing herself for maximum advantage. By Thursday afternoon, the first wave of my counterattack was ready to launch. I sat in my study, surrounded by documents that would reshape Amanda's understanding of her position in this family, when Robert's car pulled into the driveway. His timing was perfect, though he had no idea he was about to walk into the middle of a carefully orchestrated revelation. Amanda greeted him at the door with her usual performance of domestic bliss, her voice carrying through the house as she described her day of preparing the nursery and researching baby furniture. I listened to her elaborate fiction from my study, knowing that her actual day had been spent at another consultation with Derek Castellanos, the elder law attorney who was helping her plan my legal destruction. "Dad, you in there?" Robert's knock on the study door was gentle, almost apologetic, as if he were afraid of disturbing an invalid rather than approaching his father. Amanda's narrative had been more effective than I had realized, planting seeds of doubt about my mental state that were already growing in my son's mind. "Come in, Robert. We need to talk." I gestured to the chair across from my desk, the same seat where he'd sat as a boy when we discussed his grades, his college applications, his career plans. Tonight, we would discuss his wife's criminal intentions, though he didn't know it yet. Robert settled into the chair with the weariness of a man carrying burdens he couldn't quite identify. His engineering mind was excellent at solving technical problems, but Amanda's emotional manipulation had created puzzles he lacked the tools to decode. "Dad, Amanda's been worried about you. She thinks maybe we should consider getting you some help, someone to check in on you during the day." The opening was perfect, almost too convenient. "What kind of help does Amanda think I need, son?" I kept my voice neutral, curious rather than defensive, allowing him to reveal the full scope of his wife's campaign. "Well, she's noticed you seem confused sometimes, forgetting things, having trouble with financial decisions." Robert's discomfort was evident in his posture, his reluctance to make eye contact. "She's concerned that living alone in this big house might be too much for you to handle." I reached into my desk drawer and withdrew a folder that would demolish every assumption Robert had been fed about my mental state. "Robert, I want you to look at something. These are financial statements from my investment portfolio, updated as of yesterday morning. Do these look like the work of someone experiencing cognitive decline?" The numbers hit Robert like a physical blow. His engineering background had given him enough financial literacy to understand the magnitude of what he was seeing, the sophisticated investment strategies that had multiplied my wealth far beyond anything Amanda had imagined. His hands shook slightly as he turned the pages, his eyes widening with each revelation. "Dad, I had no idea. This is incredible. How did you—" His voice trailed off as the implications began to sink in. If I was managing this level of financial complexity successfully, then Amanda's concerns about my mental state were either completely wrong or deliberately fabricated. "There's more, son." I handed him a second folder, this one containing Patricia's preliminary investigation into Amanda's background. "Your wife has been lying to you about more than just my supposed confusion. She's been lying about almost everything." The documents painted a devastating picture. Amanda's previous engagement to a man in Toledo had ended when she disappeared with several $1,000s from their joint checking account. Her employment history contained gaps that coincided with investigations into embezzlement at 2 different companies. Most damning of all were bank records showing deposits from Derek Castellanos that suggested their relationship was more than attorney-client privilege. Robert's face cycled through confusion, denial, and growing horror as he processed each piece of evidence. "This can't be right. Amanda's pregnant. We're building a life together. She loves me." His voice carried the desperation of someone watching their world crumble in real time. "She loves what she thinks you represent, Robert. Security, respectability, and access to an inheritance she's been systematically researching for months." I handed him the final document in the folder, a copy of the power of attorney he'd signed and Amanda's subsequent use of it to access information about our family's assets. The silence stretched between us as Robert absorbed the full scope of his wife's betrayal. I could see the exact moment when his engineer's logical mind accepted the evidence, despite his heart's protests. His shoulders sagged, as if he were carrying the weight of a collapsed bridge, all the stress points his emotional trust had ignored, suddenly visible in stark relief. "What do I do, Dad? She's carrying my child." Even if everything you're showing me is true, that baby is still my responsibility." Robert's voice cracked with the pain of a man who'd built his future on foundations that were crumbling beneath him. "First, we protect what your mother and I built for this family's future, including your child's future," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "Second, we make sure Amanda understands that threatening a Thompson's legacy comes with consequences she never anticipated." I opened my laptop and showed Robert the email correspondence I'd initiated that afternoon. Messages to board members of local charities where Amanda had been volunteering, alerting them to potential financial irregularities.
Communications with the real estate agents she'd consulted, informing them that she had no authority to represent my interests. Most importantly, a formal complaint filed with the State Bar Association regarding Derek Castellanos' questionable legal advice and possible ethical violations. "You're destroying her, Dad?" Robert's observation was quiet, almost wondering, as if he were seeing his father clearly for the first time in years. "I'm protecting us, Robert. There's a difference." I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. Amanda made a choice when she decided to treat me like an obstacle to be removed, rather than a family member to be respected. Every action I'm taking is a response to threats she initiated. The sound of footsteps on the stairs indicated that Amanda was coming to investigate our unusually long conversation. Robert's eyes met mine, and I saw something I hadn't seen in years: complete trust in his father's judgment. The boy who'd once brought me his broken toys to fix was ready to let me repair something far more precious than any childhood treasure. "What do you need me to do?" Robert asked, his voice steady despite the emotional earthquake he'd just experienced. Before I could answer, Amanda appeared in the doorway, her smile bright and artificial as she surveyed the scene. "What are you two plotting in here? Robert, you've been gone so long I was starting to worry." Her tone was light, playful, but her eyes moved quickly between our faces, reading the tension she couldn't quite identify. "Actually, Amanda, we were just discussing some family business," I said, standing and moving around the desk to hand her one of Patricia's investigation reports. "I think you'll find it very interesting reading." Amanda's complexion shifted from rosy confidence to pale uncertainty as she scanned the first page. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach, a protective gesture that might have been touching if I didn't know the calculating mind behind her maternal performance. "Harold, I don't understand what this is supposed to mean," she said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. The evidence was too comprehensive, too detailed to dismiss as misunderstanding or coincidence. "It means, my dear daughter-in-law, that your education about the Thompson family is about to become much more thorough than you anticipated," I replied, settling back into my chair with the satisfaction of a chess player who just denounced checkmate. "And it's going to start right now." The color drained from Amanda's face as she read through Patricia's investigation, each page stripping away another layer of the carefully constructed persona she'd presented to our family. Her hand trembled as she set the documents on my desk, no longer the confident woman who'd called me a burden just days ago. Robert watched his wife with the clinical detachment of an engineer studying a structural failure, seeing all the stress points that had been hidden beneath cosmetic appearances. "This is harassment," Amanda whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "You hired someone to spy on me, to dig up private information from my past. That's illegal." She looked to Robert for support, but found only the steady gaze of a man who'd finally seen through her performance. "Actually, Amanda, everything in that report came from public records, court filings, and employment verification. Patricia Hawthorne is very careful about operating within legal boundaries, unlike your consultation with Derek Castellanos about having me declared incompetent." Amanda's composure cracked completely at the mention of her attorney's name. Her careful mask of maternal concern and family devotion shattered, revealing the calculating predator underneath. "You don't understand," she said, her voice rising with desperation. "I was protecting Robert, protecting our future. You're old, Harold. You're holding us back from building the life we deserve." "The life you deserve?" Robert's voice cut through her justifications like a blade. "Amanda, you've been lying to me for months.
about my father's mental state, about your background, about your intentions. How is any of that protecting me?"
She turned to him with tears that might have been genuine or merely strategic, her hand pressed against her belly in a gesture designed to remind him of what was at stake. "Robert, please, I'm carrying your child. We can work through this. Your father is trying to poison you against me because he can't accept that you have a new family now." "My new family was supposed to include my father," Robert said quietly, "but you decided he was expendable. You decided I was too stupid to make my own choices about my family relationships." The hurt in his voice was profound, the pain of a man who discovered that the woman he loved had never respected his judgment or his character. I stood and walked to the window, giving them space to navigate the wreckage of their marriage, while maintaining my position as the injured party who nonetheless emerged victorious. The evening light filtered through Margaret's garden, illuminating the spring flowers that would bloom regardless of human drama and deception. "Amanda, you have a choice to make," I said without turning around. "You can leave quietly, with a generous settlement that ensures you and the baby are financially secure, or you can continue this fight and discover exactly how expensive it becomes to wage war against a Thompson's resources." The silence stretched for nearly a minute before Amanda spoke, her voice hollow with defeat. What kind of settlement? The question revealed everything about her true priorities, the maternal concern dissolving into mercenary calculation even as she faced the collapse of her schemes. "Enough to buy a house in a good school district, establish a college fund for the child, and provide you with monthly support through the first 5 years," I replied, finally turning to face her. "In exchange, you relinquish any claim to Thompson assets, agreed to shared custody arrangements that Robert finds acceptable, and sign confidentiality agreements that prevent you from discussing family financial matters." Robert's expression showed surprise at my generosity, but I'd learned from 40 years in business that buying out a dangerous adversary was often cheaper than destroying them completely. Amanda's pregnancy complicated the equation, adding an innocent party who deserved protection regardless of their mother's crimes. "And if I refuse?" Amanda asked, though we all knew she lacked the resources to continue fighting. "Then Patricia continues her investigation. Marcus files criminal charges for fraud and elder abuse, and you face the consequences with whatever public defender the state provides," I said matter-of-factly. "Your choice, but you have 15 minutes to decide." Amanda looked around the study, where she'd expected to reign as the new matriarch, her eyes taking in the photographs and memories she'd planned to erase. The weight of her miscalculation was visible in her posture, the realization that she'd targeted a family with resources and connections far beyond her ability to manipulate or intimidate. "I'll take the settlement," she said finally, "but I want to see the terms in writing before I sign anything." Marcus had anticipated this moment, arriving with contracts already prepared based on our afternoon consultation. Amanda's signature was shaky but legally binding. Her dreams of inheriting millions reduced to a comfortable but modest future that would keep her away from Thompson family business permanently. Robert drove her to a hotel that night, their marriage effectively over, though the divorce proceedings would take months to finalize. When he returned, we sat in the kitchen over coffee and talked until dawn, rebuilding a relationship that Amanda's manipulation had nearly destroyed. "I'm sorry, Dad," Robert said as the sun began to rise. "I should have seen what she was doing. I should have trusted you instead of letting her convince you you were losing your mind." "You trusted your wife, son. That's what good husbands do." Amanda was skilled at manipulation because she'd practiced on other families before ours. The important thing is that you recognize the truth when it was presented clearly.
3 months later, Amanda gave birth to a healthy daughter she named Emma, though Robert and I privately called her Hope. The custody arrangements allowed Robert regular visitation, and I established a trust fund that would ensure my granddaughter never wanted for anything, regardless of her mother's choices. Dorothy Williams stopped by regularly, ostensibly to check on my well-being, but actually to coordinate our expanding network of community volunteers who kept watch for elder abuse throughout Millbrook. Margaret's memory lived on through charitable work that protected other families from the kind of predation we'd experienced. The house felt peaceful again, filled with Robert's weekend visits and Hope's laughter during the times she stayed with us. Amanda had moved to Columbus with her settlement money, establishing a new life far enough away to avoid uncomfortable encounters, but close enough for Robert to maintain his relationship with his daughter. I kept Margaret's garden exactly as she'd left it, adding only a small bench where I could sit in the evenings and tell her about the day's events. Sometimes I imagined I could hear her laughter in the wind through the roses, her approval of how we'd protected our family's legacy while ensuring Hope would grow up surrounded by love rather than manipulation. The burden Amanda had tried to discard had become the foundation of a stronger family, one built on truth rather than deception, respect rather than exploitation. Margaret would have been proud of how we'd turned her worst fears into our greatest victory. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.